Rain fell like a curtain across the evening sky, thick and unrelenting, blurring headlights and soaking the cracked sidewalks of the quiet neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of gentle rain that whispered against windows. It was fierce, cold, the kind that clung to your skin and made your bones ache. Jack pulled his hood tighter over his head as he lifted his daughter, Emma, into the back seat of their weathered minivan. She giggled, unfazed by the storm, her pink sneakers dripping as she swung her legs. "Daddy, my socks are swimming," she chirped, wrinkling her nose. Jack chuckled, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "They're not swimming. They're just taking a bath." As he reached to close the car door, a movement caught his eye. Small, slouched, and soaked. Just a few yards down the sidewalk, a woman, maybe in her early 30s, sat curled at the edge of the curb. Her scrubs clung to her skin, blue fabric dark with rain. Her shoes looked like they'd been walked in for miles. Her face was half hidden in her hands, but even from that distance Jack could see her shoulders shaking. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. He stood still for a moment, caught between instinct and hesitation. The street was nearly empty. Just the low hum of distant engines and the relentless downpour. Most people were home by now, tucked away from the storm, dinner warming their kitchens. But she looked stranded, lost, like someone who had walked straight out of a life unraveling and into the rain. "Daddy?" Emma's voice came gently from the back seat. "Why is that lady crying?" Jack glanced at his daughter, then back at the woman. His fingers tapped the roof of the van nervously. You never really knew people's stories. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe it was worse. Either way, something in her stillness, how she didn't even try to move, didn't even lift her face to wipe the water away, tugged at something buried in Jack's chest. A memory, maybe, of another storm, another time. He reached into the car and grabbed the old umbrella from under the seat. The metal was bent, and one spoke was broken, but it would do. He pulled it open, stepping into the rain, boots splashing through puddles as he walked toward her. She didn't look up until he was standing right in front of her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. For a long beat, there was no answer. Her eyes slowly lifted, and Jack was startled by how tired they looked. Not just exhausted, hollow, as if whatever had once filled her with fire had been soaked and drowned. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly. He didn't believe her. Not for a second. "You're not," he replied gently. "But it's okay not to be." The rain pelted his back, the umbrella barely shielding them both, water slipping down the edges. The woman looked away, embarrassed, wiping at her face with trembling fingers. "I just needed a second," she said. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone," Jack said. "You want to sit in the car? It's warm. I've got a heater that kind of works." She hesitated, looked toward the van, then back at him. "I don't know you," she said cautiously. "That's fair." He nodded. "Name's Jack. My daughter's in the car, Emma. I'm not here to make anything worse, just thought maybe you shouldn't be out here alone." She looked at him again, this time really looked, as if trying to decide whether he was just some guy offering help or something worse, but then something shifted in her face. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was hope. She nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. He held the umbrella a little higher, shielding her as she stood. She moved slowly, stiffly, as if every step was heavier than the one before. Together, they walked back, to the car, water squelching in her shoes, her hands wrapped around herself as if to keep from falling apart. When they reached the van, Emma leaned forward, eyes wide. "Hi," she said brightly. The woman blinked at her, and for the first time a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Hi," she whispered. Jack opened the passenger door, gesturing toward the seat. "You can warm up," he said. "We'll figure out the rest after." And as she slid into the car, into that little circle of warmth and light, the storm outside kept raging. But inside, something had shifted. Something had begun. The inside of the van was warm, not in a luxurious way, but in the way a home-cooked meal is warm. Unpolished, honest, and real. The heater coughed to life as Jack turned the key again, its low hum filling the silence that had settled between them. Rain tapped steadily on the roof like an anxious heartbeat, while the windshield wipers worked in slow, deliberate rhythm, pushing away the world outside for just a moment. The woman sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, tightly over her soaked scrubs, her body trembling less from the cold now and more from whatever storm still raged inside her. Her wet hair clung to her face, her eyes fixed on the dashboard as if speaking might shatter her. Jack glanced at her briefly, then looked back at the road ahead, his hands resting on the steering wheel though the van was parked. He knew better than to fill the silence with empty words. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing you can offer a person breaking quietly. From the back seat, Emma's voice floated forward. "Do you want my blanket?" she asked, holding up a worn, colorful piece of fleece decorated with cartoon animals. Jack opened his mouth to stop her, but the woman turned slowly and met Emma's eyes. Something flickered across her face. Disbelief, maybe, or the kind of tenderness that creeps in when you least expect it. She reached out, hesitant, as though touching something so pure might hurt more than help. But she took the blanket. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma beamed and went back to hugging her stuffed rabbit, content with her good deed. Jack cleared his throat gently. "Do you want me to take you somewhere?" he asked, keeping his voice even. She didn't answer at first. Her hands gripped the blanket, her knuckles pale. Then she shook her head. "I don't have a place," she said, her voice quiet and hoarse. "Not anymore." Jack nodded slowly, watching her out of the corner of his eye. "Okay, then you can stay with us tonight, just until you figure things out." She looked at him sharply then, eyes wide and tired all at once. "You don't even know me?" "No," he admitted. "I don't. But I don't think someone ends up crying in the rain wearing scrubs unless they've been through something bigger than I can see from out here. You don't need to explain. I'm not offering charity, just kindness. That okay with you?" She stared at him for a long moment. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "My name's Maya," she said finally. Jack gave a small nod. "It's good to meet you, Maya." They pulled away from the curb slowly, the rain still falling in sheets, the tires splashing through puddles that glimmered in the streetlights. For a while, neither of them spoke. Maya held Emma's blanket like it was the only solid thing left in her life. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say more but didn't know where to start. Eventually she spoke, barely above a whisper. "The hospital I worked at shut down 2 weeks ago. The funding was cut and they let everyone go with a few days' notice. I tried to stay on, volunteer. I couldn't just walk out on the patients, you know?" Jack nodded. "I do." She stared. Out the window, her reflection distorted by raindrops. "I gave everything to that place. I missed birthdays, holidays, rent payments. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed long enough, something would come through. But then my landlord changed the locks yesterday, said he was sorry, but business is business." Her voice cracked on that last word. She wiped her eyes quickly, ashamed of the tears. Jack kept driving. "You didn't lose everything," he said gently. "You still have hope." She laughed bitterly. "Hope doesn't pay for a motel room." "No," Jack said. "But it gets you through the night. And you've got that, Maya, I can see it. That's why you didn't give up on your patients. That's why you're still here." She turned to look at him then. Really look at him. And for the first time, her expression softened into something close to peace. It was small, fragile, but it was real. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack didn't say anything. He just nodded and kept driving through the rain, the road ahead a little brighter than before. Jack's apartment wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, scuffed hardwood floors, and a kitchen that hummed louder than it should have. But it was warm, and, for Maya, that felt like something sacred. She stood just inside the doorway, her arms still wrapped tightly around the colorful fleece blanket Emma had given her. The smell of something familiar drifted through the air. Chicken soup. Simple and homemade. It reminded her of childhood, of quiet evenings when things still felt safe. Emma dashed ahead, kicking off her wet shoes and running into the kitchen. "Daddy's soup fixes everything," she announced proudly. Jack shot her a half smile as he ladled the soup into 3 mismatched bowls. "It's not magic, but it's hot," he said, glancing at Maya. She nodded silently, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to memorize it. She hadn't been inside someone else's home in a long time. Not like this, not as a guest. Not as someone who was being offered warmth with no questions and no price. "Sit," Jack said gently, motioning to the small wooden table in the corner of the kitchen. The chairs creaked as they pulled them out, and Maya sank into one, grateful for the stillness. He placed the bowl in front of her. She stared at it for a moment before picking up the spoon. The warmth of the first sip hit her throat and settled, deep in her chest. Something inside her softened just a little. "I can't remember the last time I had a real meal," she said, not quite meaning to say it aloud. Jack sat across from her, Emma between them, slurping noisily. "Well," he said, "then you're overdue." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of spoons and Emma's occasional humming. Maya didn't speak, not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure she could without unraveling. Her body had finally stopped shivering, but her mind was still circling the last few weeks. Lost shifts, sleepless nights, the final eviction notice. "I used to be a nurse at St. Brendan's," she said eventually, her voice low. "Cardiac care. Worked there 6 years. And then just... one day, it was over." Jack nodded slowly, letting her speak without interruption. "They told us the hospital was shutting down, said it was budget cuts, mismanagement, whatever. Everyone scattered. Most of the nurses found jobs in other cities or went into private care. I didn't have that option. My dad's in assisted living near here, and some of my patients, they had no one. I couldn't just disappear on them." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she blinked them back. "I kept coming in, even after the doors closed, just to check in. One of them, Mrs. Morales, was 93. She held my hand the day she passed and told me not to lose hope. Said, 'People like you, Maya, you don't need a building to be a healer.'" She paused, a long silence stretching between her and the steam from the soup bowl. "But hope doesn't keep a roof over your head. I used up my savings on my dad's medical bills, missed a rent payment while I stayed with him during a health scare. The next thing I knew, my key didn't work anymore." Jack leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. There was no pity in his eyes, just understanding. He knew what it was like to have the rug pulled out from under you, to keep showing up when the world stopped caring. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer. Fast and cruel. Emma was 3. I didn't know how I was going to raise her on my own. Thought about giving up 100 times. But one night an old neighbor brought us a bag of groceries and said, 'You don't have to be okay right now, just stay until you are. That's what I'm offering you. No fixing. Just a place to stay until you are.'" Maya looked at him, stunned by the simplicity of the offer. No expectations, no conditions. "Thank you," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Emma climbed down from her chair and walked around the table, wrapping her small arms around Maya's waist. "You can stay in the guest room," she said brightly. "It has fairy lights." Maya let out a quiet laugh, her first in weeks. It was short, but it felt like a beginning. That night, as she lay in a borrowed bed under fairy lights and a second-hand quilt, Maya stared at the ceiling. The storm had passed outside, but inside something new was stirring. Not certainty, not yet. But the fragile flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Home wasn't a place, it was this. Warm soup, quiet understanding, and the kindness of strangers who didn't need a reason to care. The morning light slipped through the slats of the blinds, painting soft gold lines across the floor of the small guest room. Maya stirred beneath the quilt, momentarily unsure of where she was. The fairy lights above the headboard twinkled faintly, still plugged in from the night before. It took her a few seconds to remember. Jack's apartment, the warm soup, Emma's, laughter, Safety. She sat up slowly, her body still heavy with exhaustion but lighter than it had been in days. For the first time in what felt like forever, she hadn't woken to panic. No eviction notice on the door, no cold park bench. Just a warm room and the sound of bacon sizzling somewhere down the hall. Jack greeted her with a mug of coffee as she stepped into the kitchen, freshly showered and wearing one of Emma's oversized Team Unicorn t-shirts that Jack had offered when they realized she had no dry clothes. "Hope you slept okay," he said, sliding the mug across the counter. Maya nodded, wrapping her hands around it like it was life itself. "Better than I have in weeks." Emma was already dressed, munching on toast and kicking her feet under the table. "We're gonna make your resume today," she said matter-of-factly. "Daddy said you're gonna get a new job." Jack shot Maya an apologetic smile. "I might have mentioned something about helping you look if you want." Maya blinked, surprised by the offer. I haven't touched my resume in years. Everything's changed. I'm not even sure where to start." "Well," Jack said, sliding his old laptop across the table, "you start where you are. We'll figure out the rest." The screen was cracked in one corner, and some keys were faded from years of use, but Maya opened it and began to type. Slowly, her name appeared at the top of a blank document. Maya Fields, RN. Her fingers hovered there for a moment, doubt creeping in. What if no one wanted to hire someone who'd been out of work? Someone with no address? Jack noticed the hesitation. "You took care of people in a failing hospital without pay. That's not weakness. That's character." Maya exhaled and kept typing. They spent the day working in quiet companionship. Jack helped her recall job descriptions and certifications while Emma colored beside them, occasionally offering unsolicited career advice. "You should work somewhere with puppies," she said once very seriously. They all laughed. Around lunchtime, Jack stepped outside to call an old friend, Dr. Harris, who ran a community clinic across town. His wife, Emily, had worked there before she passed, and Jack knew the place was always in need of good nurses. He returned with cautious hope in his eyes. "Maya, I might have something. It's not much, just a part-time spot to start. But Dr. Harris said they'd love to meet you." Maya looked up from the laptop, eyes wide. "That fast?" Jack shrugged, trying to make it seem casual. "Some people still hire based on heart, and yours is all over this resume." She stared at the screen again, reading the words she'd typed. 6 years of hospital experience, community outreach, patient advocacy. It looked official, but more than that, it looked like someone worth believing in. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Just say you'll go," Jack replied. And she did. The next morning, Maya walked into the clinic with the resume in her hand and hope fluttering in her chest. It wasn't a grand hospital or a prestigious institution, but the walls were lined with photos of staff and patients, and every corner smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer. It felt honest. Like her. When she returned home that evening, yes, home, her eyes were lit up in a way they hadn't been in weeks. "I start Monday," she said breathlessly. "It's just afternoons to begin with, but they want to train me for full time." Jack grinned, genuinely proud. Emma did a cartwheel to celebrate and declared it Maya Day. That night, Maya sat on the couch with a cup of tea, Emma asleep under a blanket beside her, and Jack flipping through channels quietly. The fairy lights from the guest room still glowed faintly down the hallway. It wasn't just about a room or a resume anymore. It was about a second chance handed to her not with grand gestures, but with quiet trust, shared meals, and the belief that even when everything falls apart, there's always a way to begin again. A few weeks passed, and with them, the cold edge of winter softened into early spring. The air still had a bite, but sunlight lingered a little longer in the evenings, and the neighborhood began to wake up from its long, gray slumber. On one of those golden afternoons, the windows of Jack's apartment were cracked open, letting in a breeze that carried the smell of blooming daffodils and distant barbecue smoke. Maya stood at the kitchen sink, her hands buried in suds, humming softly to herself. The clatter of dishes had become familiar now, her way of helping, of saying thank you without saying the words too often. Jack was working late at the garage, and Emma sat at the table, legs tucked under her, drawing a picture of the three, of them holding hands beneath a rainbow. "We look like a family," she said without looking up. Maya paused, dish in midair. "Yeah," she said quietly, her chest tightening. "I guess we do." The words stuck with her as she rinsed the last plate and dried her hands on a dish towel. A family. It wasn't what she'd expected to find when she sat crying on the curb that rainy night, soaked and hopeless. Back then she couldn't see past her loss, her career, her home, her sense of worth. Everything had felt like it had slipped through her fingers. But now, the days held shape again. The job at the clinic had become more than just work. It had become purpose. Dr. Harris was supportive, the staff welcoming. Patients remembered her name. She caught herself smiling without realizing it, caught herself laughing out loud. The heaviness she had carried began to lift, piece by piece. That night, Jack returned home with 2 grocery bags and a tired smile. Maya met him at the door. "Guess what?" she said, barely able to contain herself. "I got approved for the apartment above the clinic. It's small, like really small, but it's mine." Jack blinked, surprised but smiling. "That's amazing, Maya," she laughed, caught between excitement and nerves. "I move in next week." Emma looked up from the couch, confused. "You're leaving?" Maya knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not going far, just a few blocks. I'll still visit, and you can visit me, too." Emma threw her arms around her neck without hesitation. "Only if you keep the fairy lights," she whispered. Maya held her tightly. "Deal."